Hello again, everybody. It's Scott Casper, Takedown Wrestling. We continue our coverage of the sport. This one brought to you by O4 Water, the science of hydration. We head out to the Northeast, where awaiting a gigantic snowstorm is the author, Scott Schulte. Scott, how are you?
I'm doing well, just like you said, preparing for this big storm they keep telling us about.
They say as much as 22 inches. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, lucky us.
It would take about 7 of Dan Gable's new books to stack up to a snowstorm of that size, but that's why we're here, to talk to you about the new Dan Gable book by you, Scott Schulte. It's called A Wrestling Life, the inspiring stories of Dan Gable. It's coming up. Official release date is what, Scott?
The official release is March 1st. Dan will be signing copies of the book at the National Duels at Carver next month. And, we're doing some, you can pre-order it. And I think, Scott, do you have the information on the pre-order from Prairie Lights?
I do. We'll be getting into that. You can pre-order it again at Prairie Lights. It's easy enough to get to online. Go to prairielights.com, great bookstore. If you order it from there, Gable will sign this thing. That's the best thing. So ordering a signed copy of the book, give them a call at 800-295-BOOK. 800-295-BOOK. It'll be on sale officially March 1st of 2015. We're talking with the author, Scott Schulte. Scott, let's get into the book a little bit and what it's talking about. The opening sentence really catches my eye, and that is, what does it take to be an Olympic gold medalist and to coach a collegiate team to 15 NCAA titles? Well, that really does beg the question, what's a wrestling life like?
Well, I think as I went through this process over the last 18 months, I was able to really find out a lot about the man, Dan Gable, not just the coach, not just the wrestler, but the man. And when you read the book, that's the fun thing about the book is you're going to find out who exactly Dan Gable is as a human being, who his family members are, and that's really going to help people understand how he was able to achieve such greatness.
And it really started for him in his boyhood home of Waterloo, Iowa. That's where the stories start, and they should, both as an athlete, a career in swimming as a young boy to his earliest wrestling matches, but it also talks about the challenges that the young men faced, some of them very, very severe.
It was very difficult. In fact, the first time that Dan and I talked, it was about me doing an article about the murder of his sister, Diane. And I tell you what, I've done a lot of writing over the last 20, 30 years, and that was one of the most difficult things that I've ever written. But true to Gable form, you can see when you read about that in the chapter how that experience changed him, motivated him, and what he did as a 15-year-old boy to really, in a lot of ways, save his family, he and his mom and dad. I don't want to give away too much, but that when you read that, you can see a glimmer of this boy who's 15, and you can see the groundwork being put together for a guy who's going to be really special in whatever it was going to be, whether he was going to go into business or, back into swimming, or as he did with wrestling.
And he's done all of that, by the way.
Yeah.
We're talking with the author, Scott Schulte, the book, A Wrestling Life, the inspiring stories of Dan Gable. Many of you have heard some Dan Gable stories, but have you heard them all? Well, many of them are played out in the pages of the new book that'll be available March 1st. It's by Dan Gable and Scott Schulte. So, in other words, these guys in many ways wrote together. What a great opportunity it was to be able to sit down and spend all that time peeling back the levels of the onion that are Gable's life. I mean, that's what you're doing. You're peeling back and revealing even more.
Well, it was really interesting because he's a very easy interview. Once you give him the topic, he'll run with it. And, when you interview people, a lot of times you have to constantly use follow-up questions. But with Dan, it was he knew what he was doing. Obviously he's been interviewed a lot. And the thing is because he was on board with the book, true to form with Dan Gable, when we were together, it was like nothing else in the world was going on in his life. I mean, he was completely focused and told such fascinating stories. And, I asked a lot of silly questions about detail about things. So just to add, the imagery, so to speak. But the same thing happened when I interviewed his wife, Kathy, who I just absolutely adore, and his 4 daughters. They all gave me their full attention, their full time, and told me just wonderful stories.
I can't wait to read A Wrestling Wife, the inspiring stories of Kathy Gable.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, I think that would be a great book, but I have a feeling that, she gave me the chapter. We did our interview last year. It was during a break at the NCAA wrestling tournament. And it was really fun because we were over there. They had a suite, with the family, and she and I were talking, and the grandkids were running around, and it just really showed she's just such a wonderful person. I have incredible respect for her and the daughters, and of course, Dan.
I don't know how you couldn't. They've done a great job of managing to mold a family life in and around a very public life, not just here in the States, but literally around the world. The man is that well known for what he accomplished and what he continued to do, even as a coach at the University of Iowa, from coaching the Bannocks to the Brands and the life-changing friendships he made along the way. The tales of his family life off the mat are sometimes unbelievable. When he refers to having a sauna at this cabin or that cabin, or taking an entire month and being away from family in the midst of wrestling season. I should say taking a time away from wrestling with his family in the midst of wrestling season. What it tells me is that there's been some big decisions made by the family, by Dan and Kathy, and these decisions have been followed through, not just put on the shelf and looked at from time to time, but this is the way they live. And for $17.37 hardcover price, I'm going to tell you, not only is it a great read, it's a great insight into the life of Dan Gable. Will it change your life? It possibly could. If you can pull one thing out of a book, every time I read, if I can pull one thing out of a book, whether it's a word, an idea, a paragraph, a chapter, an insight, by golly, my time has been well spent. Would you agree with that estimation about this book, A Wrestling Life?
Absolutely, or I wouldn't have, I wouldn't have done the project had I not believed that strongly. I mean, I took a lot of time out of my career as a writer. Family members on my end made some sacrifices, big sacrifices, so that I could fulfill this. And the whole reason was I felt so strongly about the stories that he was going to tell. And my family supported me because of that, especially after the first time Dan and I met. We talked in his cabin for several hours, and I just recorded everything. And I came back to Connecticut, and I had my father listen to the recordings as I was writing them. And he was, my dad's been, such a huge support of this project. And going back to your initial question, when people, we've had people read the book, obviously, at this point, and all of them have said that they've come away feeling, just better about themselves, having read this, because there's so many stories of, you going back to the Diane story. When you read that, you can't help but be impressed by this kid who turns out to be Dan Gable. And then on the other hand, later on, as he is a father, and his interaction with all these different athletes, and it's not. I think it's really going to knock people's socks off, because they're not going to expect what they get, if that makes any sense.
I think it does, and as time always runs up on us, we are sadly out of time, but we're going to encourage you folks to be able to buy this book in advance, okay? Get it through, surely you can get it through a variety of different sites, but we're going to tell you about one particular site where we know you're going to get an autographed copy. Prairie Lights in Iowa City. It's on South Dubuque Street in Iowa City. The phone number there, 800-295-BOOK. Again, that's 800-295-BOOK. Pre-order that book today. It's Dan Gable's A Wrestling Life. Give them a call. I should say 800-295-BOOK. It'll go on sale March 1st of 2015. No greater gift than one that inspires. Dan Gable with Scott Schulte, and again, the name of the book is A Wrestling Life, the inspiring stories of Dan Gable. Can we do it again, Scott?
Absolutely. I always have a blast talking to you, Scott.
I sure appreciate your time today. Best of luck with the heavy snow that's scheduled to hit you guys this afternoon. Lay in all the logs that you can. Keep the family warm.
Thank you, Scott. Take care.
He's the author, Scott Schulte. I'm Scott Casper from Takedown Media. This brought to you by O4 Water, the science of hydration.